That is a really powerful song. If you're not familiar with it, it's called Ani Ma'amin, and it means I believe. And it was written by a cantor named David Fastag on one of the cattle cars of Jews being shipped off in the Holocaust to Treblinka, a death camp as bad, some say even worse, than Auschwitz. And riding for days, packed in, sensing strongly that nothing good would come at the end of that ride if they didn't already know they'd be murdered. And in the midst of that misery, Cantor Fastag, this old man, was sort of like his mind was far away. He saw himself next to his Rebbe, the Mujitzer Rebbe, who had escaped on Yom Kippur. And a melody came to him with words from Maimonides, the Rambam's 13 Principles of Faith. The 12th principle, I believe with a complete faith in the coming of Mashiach, and though he may tarry, nevertheless I long for him every day. Those are the words. And this melody came to him from above, and he just started singing it. He didn't even know what was going on around him. He got so into this song and this new melody that came to him, and he didn't even realize that as he was singing it, all the Jews around him in that cattle car started singing it, and the song filled the space, and they heard it in the next car. And pretty soon all the Jews on this death train, this ride to the end, to the horror of the Holocaust, were singing this song, I believe, with a complete faith in the coming of Mashiach. And the song spread throughout, and they were just singing for such a long time, and eventually it ended. And Cantor Fastag said, I will give half my portion in the world to come to anyone who will bring this song, right? Because they're all going to die. How's this song going to survive? To somebody who will bring this song to the Mujitzer Rebbe. 2 young Jews volunteered. Somehow they got on shoulders. They literally just hit their way, clawed their way through the wooden roof of the cattle car. One of them died jumping off the train. The other made it, jumped off and survived, rolled in the snow, I don't know what. And somehow with this mission to get that song, that melody to the Mujitzer Rebbe, he escaped from Hitler's Europe and brought that song to the Mujitzer Rebbe, who sang it that year at Yom Kippur with all his Hasidim, his disciples. And we've been singing it ever since. That particular rendition of it was sung by, let me get the names right, Rabbi Baruch Levine, Shlomi Gertner, Shlomi Daskel, the Mizamrim Choir, Yingerlech, led by Shea Rosen, where in January 2020, at the Yom HaShoah, right, the celebration of the completion of the last Daf Yomi cycle, in the beginning of the hours that we're in now, at Giant Stadium, at MetLife Stadium in New Jersey. I was at the previous Yom HaShoah, which was in August of 2012, hot summer day in the stadium. This last one, January 2020, bitter cold. But both featured 93,000 people packing a football stadium, the stands and the field, celebrating this unbroken tradition stretching all the way back to Mount Sinai of us studying the oral law. Hitler utterly failed to wipe out the Jewish people, the Jewish dream, the Jewish mission. When you sing a song like that, it's just so powerful. Of course, I'm sharing this with you now because tonight begins Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Remembrance Day, Holocaust Memorial Day in Israel and around the world. I've shared many times with this group, and I actually just put a little video on the Facebook page and TikTok that my grandfather was murdered in the Holocaust at Dachau. My grandmother survived and carried my mother as an infant through the camp, through Theresienstadt. So we celebrate both those we lost and those who survived. This unbroken dream, Am Yisrael Chai, the nation of Israel lives. And what does it live for? So that we can bring this light into the world that we're sharing right now, you and me, at this moment. So, let's do it. Where are we? We're on page 51a, right at the top. Here in Tractate Yevamos, the 14th volume of the Talmud. We are in chapter 5. There's only one Mishna in this chapter. Tonight's page is somewhat short, but complicated. And we're looking at what are the implications, ramifications, when we have a yibum situation. A man died, childless, he leaves a brother or maybe multiple brothers. He leaves a widow or maybe multiple widows if he had more than one wife. One brother with one wife is supposed to perform a yibum or chalitzah, and then they exempt any other brothers and any other co-wives that go on with their lives. But now we introduce this complication that if they perform levirate betrothal, right, which really isn't necessary. We learned yesterday that some said it was preferable, but it definitely complicates the situation because it's unnecessary. The brother and the sis and the widow can just have sexual intercourse together, and then they're married, and then God willing they'll have a child, and that child will be considered the heir of the man who died, and his brother will inherit his property in the meantime, but it will pass to this oldest son, who is going to be the heir of the one who died without a child. So, and if the surviving brother and widow were to marry because they're into each other, then that would be violating the mitzvah. They're only doing it to fulfill an obligation, right? An obligation to the Jewish people, an obligation to the next generation. We've been so acclimated in our culture for several generations that, marriage is all about love, love, love. Love will find a way. Love, love, love. All you need is love. Yeah, our ancestors didn't approach marriage that way at all. At all. There's the mitzvah of procreation. There's the mitzvah of joining families. There's the traditions. Love will come. You saw it in Fiddler on the Roof. They build love. They build love because they share values. They share a home. They build a home. And over time, love comes. In many ways, that love is stronger, the strongest. But this idea of attraction, it's all about attraction. Now we have a higher divorce rate probably than at any other time in history. But this idea that people are part of a mission, it's really important to remember that and understand it as we read it. We want to get a takeaway when it gets complicated like this, and there's all these different, permutations. Did he give levirate betrothal first and then a bill of divorce and then chalitzah? Or was there intercourse and then a bill of divorce? Or was there a bill of divorce and then another bill of divorce? So we're going to go through it smooth and steady and try to keep it straight in our heads. But we want to have that underlying sense of why we're learning this and what was at stake for God, for Moshe, for the Jewish people, why we received this instruction, right? And it's no small thing that this small and, let's say, physically, not so powerful people still here thousands of years later, then the mighty empires who persecuted us and tried to destroy us are all gone, gone, gone gone into the wisps of history, as it were. This idea of continuity, unity, mission, purpose, let's keep that front and center as we learn this. And then a little later, I'll share a story that I heard yesterday, because it was the yard site of the Sanzer Rebbe, about marriage. Very colorful and uplifting story. But I'll get to that a little later. All right. Rava said, what is the reason for the ruling of Rabban Gamliel? Oh my God. All right. By the way, first of all, there is a fraudulent page pretending to be accidental Talmudist and spamming people here. Please report that. You know, if accidental Talmudist is offering you Bitcoin, yeah, that's a fraud. Report that as impersonating our page. Nina will be, removing that. We play whack-a-mole with these scammers and trolls who comment on these live shows. Very often they come in and reply to people the next day, and they want to be friends with you. They find you attractive, this, that, the other thing. We ban them as soon as we see them, and I apologize, and join us in reporting these trolls and spammers. Okay. So Rava said, what is the reason for the ruling of Rabban Gamliel that a bill of divorce is not effective after a bill of divorce, right? So when do we need a bill of divorce in a yibum context? After a levirate betrothal was made. So a Yevama, the widow, comes before her Yavam, the surviving brother of the man who died. They have a levirate bond until they perform either yibum or chalitzah. Yibum, they have sexual intercourse. Now they're married, done. Or they opt to perform chalitzah, that ceremony. Okay, they're free. She goes her way, he goes his. They're not permitted to each other anymore because she is his chalitzah. But until they perform yibum or chalitzah, they have the levirate bond. During that period, if he betroths her, they are engaged to marry, which in ancient times meant something different than now. It's as much as marriage, even though they haven't consummated the union, they become prohibited to other people. So if they want to break that off, now they require a bill of divorce, even if they haven't consummated the union. If he performs yibum, they're fully married. If they want to divorce later, sure, they would need a bill of divorce. But before yibum, and what about before betrothal? They just start with a bill of divorce because they made a mistake, because they should have done chalitzah if they want to go their separate ways, but instead they did a bill of divorce. What happens then? And what would you mean a bill of divorce after a bill of divorce? If you already gave a get, why would you give a get to the same woman? But maybe there were co-wives, right? So maybe there were two wives and he gave a get to both of them when he only needed to do chalitzah with one of them, and then the other would have been exempt. Or they're two brothers and they both gave a bill of divorce to the same woman, totally muddling the waters and making a confusion, but this is what we're inspecting. So Rava said, what is the reason for the ruling of Rabban Gamliel that a bill of divorce is not effective after a bill of divorce? It is because he is uncertain with regard to a bill of divorce, whether it effectively precludes levirate marriage, yibum, or whether it does not preclude levirate marriage. If they give a bill of divorce where they stood for yibum, is it just nothing? Did they accomplish nothing? Can they now still perform yibum afterwards? Or maybe not. Similarly, he is uncertain with regard to levirate betrothal, whether it is effectively acquires the Yevama or it does not acquire her at all. Recall, yibum and chalitzah, fully effective by Torah law. Levirate betrothal, a bill of divorce. In a case of levirate betrothal, these are functioning by rabbinic law. And the bottom line is they create an uncertainty. You can't ignore them. You have to deal with them, but they don't acquire as fully as yibum would. They don't break off as fully as chalitzah would. Okay, so the Gemara clarifies. With regard to a bill of divorce, he is uncertain as to whether it precludes levirate marriage or does not preclude it. If the first bill of divorce precludes levirate marriage, What did he do by giving the latter bill of divorce, as it has no substance? Alternatively, if the first bill of divorce does not preclude levirate marriage, neither does the latter bill of divorce preclude levirate marriage. This will become clear as we go along. Likewise, with regard to levirate betrothal, Rabban Gamliel is uncertain as to whether it acquires the Yevama or it does not acquire her. If the first levirate betrothal effectively acquires the Yevama, what does the last one accomplish? And if the first one does not acquire her, so then the last one also does not acquire her. For this reason, Rabban Gamliel maintains that a bill of divorce is not effective after a bill of divorce was given. And similarly, levirate betrothal is not effective after levirate betrothal was performed. Do the rabbis agree with Rabban Gamliel? Even that's not so clear, but the rabbi's opinion is that since levirate betrothal is a rabbinic institution, its effect is not complete, and thus both levirate betrothal and a bill of divorce can be effective even after levirate betrothal. Because they have an effect, but it is not a complete effect. You can have a further effect afterward. Abaye raised an objection to his opinion from a baraisa. And Rabban Gamliel concedes, now in a baraisa, and Rabban Gamliel concedes that a bill of divorce is effective after levirate betrothal, and levirate betrothal is effective after a bill of divorce. How so? If a Yavam gave a bill of divorce to one Yevama, and then he performed levirate betrothal with the other Yevama, because there were two wives, co-wives of the man who died, or the reverse, both actions would be effective. Now, what should he have done? Right? There's one brother and two widows who are co-wives. He performs either yibum or chalitzah with one of them, and the other is released, exempt, finished. But because he didn't do that, because he got into the muddy waters of betrothal and get, so what did he do? He gave one of them a bill of divorce. He meant to say, let's just go our separate ways and break off the levirate bond and by performing chalitzah, but instead he gave her a bill of divorce. And the other one he betrothed. So what has he actually done? Did he break the levirate bond with that bill of divorce? No, not really. Did he acquire the other one with the betrothal? Sort of, but not really. And he also concedes that a bill of divorce is effective after intercourse and levirate betrothal, such that if the Yavam engaged in levirate betrothal with one Yevama, and he engaged in intercourse with a second, and he gave a bill of divorce to a third, so there were three co-wives. Okay? And so he did intercourse with one, a bill of divorce to the second, and betrothal to the third. Yeah, this is never going to happen in real life, but now we have to understand what would happen. So if he did that, so then the bill of divorce is effective, and he is prohibited from marrying the relatives of the third Yavama, the one that he gave the bill of divorce, right? So now it's like she's divorced from him, and he can't marry her relatives. And Rabban Gamliel concedes that levirate betrothal is effective after intercourse and a bill of divorce, such that if he gave a bill of divorce to one woman, and then he engaged in intercourse with a second of these three co-wives, and he performed levirate betrothal with a third, so then the levirate betrothal is effective, and the third woman, if they're going to divorce now, requires a get, even though they haven't consummated that marriage. And if Rabban Gamliel is uncertain with regard to the efficacy of levirate betrothal or a bill of divorce in a yibum situation, then the third action should not be effective. Either the initial levirate betrothal or bill of divorce was completely effective, in which case any subsequent action is not effective. Because if he started with a bill of divorce, he should have performed chalitzah, but he did a bill of divorce. If that was effective, then it would have broken the levirate bond and be like chalitzah. But it's not effective like chalitzah. Likewise, a betrothal, if it was fully effective, it would be like they perform yibum and they are now married. But it is not fully effective. And that's why, even though they perform that action, that if you did yibum, then after yibum and you did something else, it wouldn't matter. Like, for instance, if you did chalitzah after yibum with the same woman, the chalitzah would be meaningless because you married her. Now you can no longer perform chalitzah. You could give a get after you perform intercourse. But if you didn't fully marry her, you only did this betrothal, okay, you could break off the betrothal with a get, but what if you did this betrothal with one of the co-wives and intercourse with the other? Then where are you, right? That's the kinds of questions we're looking at here. So Abaye said, actually, it is obvious to Rabban Gamliel that a bill of divorce precludes levirate marriage. That if you have a Yevam and you give her a bill of divorce, now you can't marry her. This is Abaye saying this is how Rabban Gamliel would hold. A bill of divorce precludes levirate marriage, and levirate betrothal acquires the Yevama like yibum would. Nevertheless, the sages said that with regard to this Yevama, in one respect, the bill of divorce is effective for her, and in another respect, levirate betrothal is effective for her. But they are not effective in the same manner. Therefore, a bill of divorce given after a bill of divorce does not preclude levirate marriage, as the first bill of divorce has already precluded it for him as much as it can preclude it by means of a bill of divorce. And levirate betrothal performed after levirate betrothal does not acquire her, as the first levirate betrothal acquired her for him as much as a betrothal can acquire a Yevama, which is not fully the way yibum would. However, with regard to a bill of divorce after levirate betrothal and levirate betrothal after a bill of divorce, this action precludes levirate marriage, and that action acquires the Yevama. Right? If you betroth her and then give her a get, where are you? Are you back to you have a levirate bond? No, you've broken the bond. But some say you still require chalitzah, right? And if you gave her a get and then you betrothed her, where are you? You now have a betrothal that would require a get in order to part company, but you have not dissolved the levirate bond, at least according to some opinions. So, however, the rabbis maintain that the sages instituted for each and every one of the brothers-in-law both the nullification of a bill of divorce and the acquisition of levirate betrothal for a Yevama, and they decreed that these should be effective for each of the Yevamos. Therefore, the strength of the first bill of divorce or levirate betrothal is equal to that of the second one, and both are effective. In other words, the sages said that because this betrothal in a yibum situation creates confusion, you're gonna have to deal with it, right? So even if you made a betrothal with this Yevama and a betrothal with that Yevama, and you might have thought that, okay, well, the betrothal with the first one, if you made yibum with the first Yevama, the second one is exempt and no further actions have any validity whatsoever. But if you only did a betrothal with the first one, and then you did a betrothal with the second one, both betrothals are valid. And if you want to break them off, you're going to need gets for both of them. Abaye proceeds to explain the rest of Rabban Gamliel's teaching in the Baraisa. And this invalid intercourse, in other words, intercourse that was performed after a disqualifying action, such as levirate betrothal or bill of divorce, well, it is superior to levirate betrothal and also inferior to levirate betrothal. It is preferable to levirate betrothal in the following respect. Whereas levirate betrothal after levirate betrothal is not effective at all, intercourse after levirate betrothal is effective because intercourse acquires a Yevama according to Torah law. This would be if you got involved with the betrothal, then you perform yibum. Okay, you're back on solid ground. You betrothed her, then you had intercourse. Now you're fully married. You performed yibum. You're all good. A betrothal after a betrothal, you're still on this shaky ground. What about an intercourse before a betrothal? What would that even mean? Once you performed intercourse, yibum, you married her. Nothing else is necessary. That betrothal afterward, it's meaningless if it's with the same woman. What about if there were two co-wives, you perform yibum with one of them. Now the other one was exempt. She goes her separate way. But you made a mistake and betrothed her. Or even one of the other brothers betrothed her. That is an invalid betrothal. They cannot remain married. But you're going to require a get to undo it. But let's stay here where we are. So in one sense, intercourse that was performed after disqualifying action, like levirate betrothal or bill of divorce, the invalid intercourse is superior to levirate betrothal and inferior to levirate betrothal. It is preferable to levirate betrothal in that, whereas levirate betrothal after levirate betrothal is not effective at all, intercourse after betrothal is effective, because intercourse acquires a Yevama by Torah law. And this intercourse is inferior to levirate betrothal, invalid intercourse, after a sequence of events where the earlier events shouldn't have happened, but it did. And so then the intercourse that comes after that, it is inferior to levirate betrothal. For whereas levirate betrothal after a bill of divorce, according to Rabban Gamliel, acquires the entire remainder of the woman left by the bill of divorce, such that any further levirate betrothal would be ineffective. Intercourse after a bill of divorce does not acquire the entire remainder of the woman left by the bill of divorce, as it is not considered valid intercourse, and a subsequent levirate betrothal would be effective. The sages taught how, i.e., in what case, did Rabban Gamliel say that a bill of divorce is not effective after a bill of divorce? In the case of two Yevamos, right, so two co-wives of the man who died, two widows who were co-wives, and who happened before one Yavam. There was one brother and two co-wives, and he gave a bill of divorce to this one and a bill of divorce to that one. Rabban Gamliel says he needs to now perform chalitzah with the first one. Right? The bill of divorce didn't solve the problem. They shouldn't have done it. But they did it. So now what does he have to do? He performs chalitzah with one of the co-wives. That's as if the bills of divorce never happened. That's what he needed to do anyway. But he had the option to perform yibum before. Now that option is off the table. He can only perform chalitzah. He does that with one of them. Now the other one is just exempt, and he can marry her relatives. He can't marry relatives of his chalutza, but he can marry relatives of her co-wife who was exempt and went out free, right? So Rabban Gamliel says he performs chalitzah with the first one and is forbidden to marry her relatives because she's his chalutza, but he's permitted to marry the relatives of her co-wife. Because the bill of divorce he gave the second woman is of no consequence at all. She's merely the rival wife of his chalutza, and he is therefore permitted to marry her relatives. But the rabbis who disagree with Rabban Gamliel say, if he gave a bill of divorce to this co-wife and a bill of divorce to that one, he's forbidden to marry the relatives of both of them, and he must perform chalitzah with one of them. So that bill of divorce for the second one, he doesn't need to perform chalitzah with both of them. But that bill of divorce, that invalid bill of divorce that he gave to one of them, will preclude him from marrying her relatives as if she was his divorcee. And you would say the same with regard to two Yevamim and one Yevama, if there were two brothers and one Yevama. If the two brothers gave one Yevama a bill of divorce, one after the other, Rabban Gamliel maintains that the bill of divorce of the second Yavam, the second brother, is of no account, and he's therefore permitted to marry her relatives, whereas the rabbis hold that it is effective in that it renders him forbidden to her relatives. How, with regard to what circumstance, did Rabban Gamliel say there is no levirate betrothal after levirate betrothal? In a case of two Yevamos who happened before one Yavam, and he performed levirate betrothal with this one and levirate betrothal with that one. So Rabban Gamliel says he gives a bill of divorce to the first one, and he performs chalitzah with her, and he's forbidden to her relatives, but he is permitted to the relatives of the second one, as the levirate betrothal performed with the rival wife is ineffective. But the rabbis say he must give a bill of divorce to both of them, as the levirate betrothal is effective for both women, and he is forbidden to the relatives of both women. And as for chalitzah, he must perform that with one of them. And you would say the same with regard to two Yevamim and one Yevama, two brothers and one wife. If the first Yavam performed levirate betrothal with the Yevama, and the second Yavam consequently performed levirate betrothal with her, they are both required to give her a bill of divorce, and they are both forbidden to marry her relatives, and then one of them performs chalitzah with her. The master said above in the Baraisa, he gives a bill of divorce to this one and a bill of divorce to that one. Rabban Gamliel says he He performs chalitzah with the first one, and he's forbidden to marry her relatives, and he's permitted to marry the relatives of the second one. Now the Gemara asks, shall we say that this is a conclusive refutation of the statement of Shmuel? For Shmuel said, if he performed chalitzah with the woman who received the bill of divorce, the rival wife is not exempted by this invalid chalitzah. The Yavam must therefore repeat the chalitzah with the rival wife as well. And this appears to contradict the Baraisa, where Rabban Gamliel rules that he has to perform chalitzah with only one of the Yevamos. The Gemara answers, Shmuel could have said to you, when I said my above teaching, it was in accordance with the opinion of the one who said the levirate bond is substantial. What does it mean that the levirate bond is substantial? This is something that the sages argued about and was never really resolved. Here's a quick explanation. Although the Torah forbids a widow who requires levirate marriage from remarrying until chalitzah has been performed, the nature of the connection between her and her yavam is not clear. Is this connection seen as a form of betrothal, which is what we mean when we say the levirate bond is substantial, or is it seen as a unilateral obligation upon the widow to wait for her brother-in-law's action? This is what we mean when we say the levirate bond is not substantial. So Shmuel could have said to you, when I said my above teaching, it was in accordance with the opinion of the one who said that the levirate bond is substantial. And he must therefore perform a valid chalitzah in order to cancel this bond. A chalitzah performed with a woman who received a bill of divorce is not powerful enough to cancel the bond of the rival wife who did not perform chalitzah. This is very strange, right? If there were two wives, the obligation on the Yavam, the brother, is just to perform chalitzah with one of them, and the other one is exempt and free to go. But because he first gave a bill of divorce to one or even both of them, and then performed chalitzah with one of them, according to this opinion, now the other one is not free to go until she gets chalitzah, right? That needless get muddied the waters. But Rabban Gamliel holds that the levirate bond is not substantial, and therefore any chalitzah that releases one of the women also releases the other. The Gemara asks, but if so, from the fact that Rabban Gamliel holds that the levirate bond is not substantial, and now we're on 51b, it can be inferred that the rabbis hold that the levirate bond is substantial, the rabbis who disagree with Rabban Gamliel, as it is assumed that they disagree with Rabban Gamliel in this regard as well. And the latter clause of that Baraisa teaches, and you would say the same with regard to two Yevamim and one Yevama, such that if the two Yevamim gave one Yevama a bill of divorce, she is exempted by the chalitza of one of them. If so, let us say that it is a conclusive refutation of the statement that Rabba bar Rav Huna said that Rav said, for Rabba bar Rav Huna said that Rav said, in cases of invalid chalitza, the Yavam is required to repeat the chalitza with all the brothers. And if the chalitza was invalid for some reason, all the brothers must perform chalitza with the Yavam, as her bond with them is not canceled by an invalid chalitza. The Gemara responds, Rabba bar Rav Huna could have said to you, both Rabban Gamliel and the rabbis hold that the levirate bond is not substantial, whereas my statement is in accordance with the opinion that the levirate bond is substantial. And here the dispute does not concern the topic of the levirate bond at all, but rather it only involves the explicitly mentioned issue that we're talking about. They disagree with regard to the efficacy of a bill of divorce, a get, after a get, and levirate betrothal after levirate betrothal. The master said above in the Baraisa, if he performed levirate betrothal with this one, and levirate betrothal with that one, Rabban Gamliel says he gives a bill of divorce to the first one, and he performs chalitza with her, and he is forbidden to her relatives, but the other one is completely freed, and he is permitted to the relatives of that other one. The Gemara poses a question. Since Rabban Gamliel holds that levirate betrothal is not effective after levirate betrothal, and the second levirate betrothal is of no consequence, the first woman should also be permitted to enter into levirate marriage. Why must he perform chalitza with her? And the Gemara answers, it is prohibited due to a rabbinic decree, lest he perform levirate marriage with the second woman. The sages were concerned that in cases where the Yavam performed levirate betrothal with both women, if he were permitted to consummate the levirate marriage with the first woman, he might do so with the second. Once you muddied the waters with this levirate betrothal, now you need a get for anyone who had a levirate betrothal and a chalitzah with at least one of them. Rabbi Yochanan said, Rabban Gamliel and Beis Shammai and Rabbi Shimon and Ben Azai and Rabbi Nehemiah, they all hold that levirate betrothal acquires the Yevama as a full-fledged acquisition, like you would if you did yibum. But also like a regular betrothal. Right? What they're saying is, well, look, if there was no yibum, if there was simply a Jewish man and a Jewish woman, and they were betrothed to each other, okay, that's a simple case. We get that. In the ancient world, they might be betrothed for a long time before they actually get married. They haven't consummated that union, but they're considered married to each other. They're prohibited to other people. If they want to break it off, they need a get. Why should it matter that in a yibum situation, when they perform the same action, why isn't it a full-fledged betrothal? You think it would be. If anything, it would be strengthened by the fact that they also have this levirate bond. But as we've seen, that levirate betrothal complicates things so much. So these guys are all of the opinion that the levirate betrothal acts just like a regular betrothal, and she becomes his wife, and he needs to give her a get, and it's like a full-fledged acquisition. Now, the source for Rabban Gamliel's opinion is that which we said above, that levirate betrothal is not effective after levirate betrothal. Rabbi Yochanan maintains that the second levirate betrothal is not effective because she was already fully acquired by the first one, right? Levirate betrothal after levirate betrothal, well, that first levirate betrothal was marriage, like a yibum. So that's the reason that the second levirate betrothal doesn't do anything, because the first one was like you perform yibum. The source for the opinion of Beis Shammai is as we learned in the Mishna. So we had a Mishnah that said in the case of 3 brothers, 2 of whom were married to 2 sisters, and 1 who was single, and then the following occurred. The husband of one of the sisters died. He didn't have a child. So he leaves behind a wife and 2 brothers, right? One brother is married to the sister of his widow, and the other brother is single. And the single brother performed levirate betrothal with this widow. Afterward, the second brother died, whereby the second brother's wife, who was the sister of the first widow who betrothed the single brother, now she comes before the single brother for levirate marriage as well. So in this case, Beis Shammai say his wife that he betrothed remains with him. She remains betrothed. She's considered like his wife, and he's not required to divorce her. And the other one just goes out. She's exempt from yibum or chalitzah because she's not only, the widow of the brother of this man, but she's also the sister of his wife. And because she's the sister of his wife, yibum does not apply to her. She just goes free. This indicates that Beis Shammai hold that the levirate betrothal, right, that single brother didn't perform yibum with the first widow. He only betrothed her. So this indicates that Beis Shammai hold that the levirate betrothal performed with the first woman makes her fully betrothed, thereby nullifying the levirate bond with her sister. Now, the source for the opinion of Rabbi Shimon is based on the following case, which we'll encounter on page 96 in a Mishnah. In the case of a boy aged 9 years and 1 day old, who had relations with his Yevama. I mean, you read this, you're like, what are we talking about? This is crazy. That the surviving brother is a 9-year-old boy, and he's going to have sexual intercourse with his brother's widow. Yeah, this never happened in real life. But if it did, we would need to know how to deal with it. What effect did that intercourse have on the respective obligations of the brother and the widow? So in the case of a boy aged 9 years and 1 day old who had relations with his Yevama, and afterwards his brother, who is also 9 years and 1 day old, had relations with her, so then the second brother disqualifies her from performing levirate marriage with the first one. And Rabbi Shimon says he does not disqualify her. As it is taught in a Baraisa that Rabbi Shimon said to the rabbis, if the intercourse of the first brother is considered effective intercourse, even though it was he was not an adult when he did it, then the intercourse of the second brother is not considered effective intercourse, such that it would disqualify her from performing levirate marriage with the first brother, as the first brother already acquired her through his intercourse. The problem is that essentially his wife cheated on him. They might have to get divorced because of that second lovemaking. If the intercourse of the first brother is not effective intercourse because he's a minor, then the intercourse of the second brother is also not effective intercourse because he's also a minor. And the sages considered the intercourse of a 9-year-old boy to be like levirate betrothal. It's kind of like getting married and kind of not. And Rabbi Shimon says that the intercourse of the second boy is not considered intercourse. And this proves that in his opinion, the intercourse of a 9-year-old fully acquires the Yevama, and similarly so does levirate betrothal. Now the source of Ben Azai's opinion is as it is taught, and we're almost done, so if you have questions or comments, get them in. The source of Ben Azai's opinion is as it is taught in a Baraisa that Ben Azai says levirate betrothal is effective after levirate betrothal in the case of 2 brothers and 1 widow, but levirate betrothal is not effective after levirate betrothal in the case of 2 widows and 1 brother, because the latter case involves only 1 brother. His levirate betrothal fully acquires the first widow, and therefore the levirate betrothal he performs with the second widow is of no account, as he is already betrothed to the first one, and that releases the second one. Now the source of Rabbi Nehemiah's opinion is as we learned in a Mishna that Rabbi Nehemiah says, with regard to both intercourse and chalitzah, whether at the beginning, in the middle, or at the end, nothing is effective after it, since you either acquire a wife by Torah law or release her by Torah law through yibum or chalitzah. Any other action you take afterward, like levirate betrothal or a get, etc., an invalid get, is going to have no effect, because by Torah law, you either acquired her as a wife or released her through chalitzah. And the sages considered invalid intercourse to be like levirate betrothal, and Rabbi Nehemiah teaches that nothing is effective after it. And this indicates that he maintains that no form of acquisition is effective after levirate betrothal, as levirate betrothal completely acquires the Yevama as if it was a regular betrothal. That's where we're going to leave off. Before I get to questions or comments, I'll just quickly share this story that I heard yesterday at Shul from Rabbi Chaim Rubin, here at Etz Chaim. A gifted storyteller. I won't be able to, and he's a wonderful old Hasidic rabbi with a long beard and a shtreimel with a really deep voice. And he told this story on the yard site, the anniversary of the death of the first Sanz Rebbe, Chaim Halberstam, whose father was a great Torah scholar, but not a rabbi. And there was a famous, rabbi who wanted to marry off his beautiful daughter. And because he was an illustrious rabbi, I forget his name, might have been the Baruch Tam, but I'm not sure. And he wanted to marry off his daughter, and he wanted to marry her to another big rabbi, right? So they wanted to join 2 rabbinic families, 2 rabbinic dynasties, as it were. His son, right, the brother of this girl to be married off, said to his father, the rabbi, you should marry her to this guy, Halberstam. He is a genius, an absolute Torah genius. And the father said, yeah, but I already, started a process. I sent word to the Lemberger rabbi that he should send his son to marry my daughter, and I can't retract the offer until I hear back from him. And I gave him exactly 1 month to give me an answer. Circumstances were such that eventually the 1 month expired, and then so the girl's father, the rabbi, said, okay, she can marry this boy Halberstam, who everyone says is such a Torah genius and a gifted rabbi in his own right. Now the only issue with him, with Chaim Halberstam, is that he had a limp, right? So physically he was a little bit hobbled, as it were. He walked with a limp. But the father said, yes, you will marry my daughter. And at those times, love was not what it's about, right? So it was just, he told the daughter, you're going to marry him. But when she saw that he had a limp and that he was imperfect, and maybe he was challenged in other ways in terms of his appearance, she said, no, I won't. No, I will not marry him. I will not marry him. I don't want to marry him. And her resistance was so strong, right, because she was kind of physically put off, that the rabbi who loved his daughter was at that point willing to say, look, what can I do? I'm not going to force her to, I arrange a marriage for her, but there's a limit of what I'm going to impose on her, and she just doesn't want to marry you. So Halberstam, right, the future Sansa Rebbe, says, okay, I will accept that, but I would like to have a conversation with her first. Okay. So she agreed to have a conversation with him. She comes into the room, and he says to her, look at the mirror. She looks in the mirror, and she sees herself disfigured and with a limp. What? She's looking in the mirror. She knows what she looks like. Why does she suddenly look different? He says to her, you and I were destined to be together. Your neshama, my neshama, our souls agreed with the Holy One above before we came down here that we would be soulmates. Beshert. You were destined to be disfigured and with a limp. I said to the Holy One, listen, it's difficult for a woman to, deal with that kind of a challenge. I'll take it on. It doesn't matter to me if I'm not so good looking, if I walk with a limp. Let her just be, beautiful and whatever, not have to deal with the challenge of that. And I'll take it on myself. That's the agreement we made with the one above. So, if you don't want to marry me, then I don't need to take your limp, and you can have it back, and you'll be like you look in the mirror right now. They got married. They got married. They had an incredible marriage. They had 14 children together. Seven boys and 7 girls. Many of the sons were Rebbes of their own dynasties. The Sansa Rebbe was considered a miracle worker. He wrote important treatises, and he himself never had a penny on him because all the money that flowed in from his many disciples instantly went out to charity. He was a real Baal Tzedakah, just a master of distributing charity. And so much flowed through him and helped other people. And he was just a great shining light in the world. And his yahrzeit was yesterday. May his neshama and his wife's have a great aliyah in the world of souls. Okay. Let's see if there are any questions that I can answer here on Yevamos 51. Sharon, how is the husband's name carried on when chalitzah is the chosen option? It's not. Right, and that's why the language that they speak at the chalitzah ceremony is, so is done, she takes off the shoe, right, publicly, so is done to the brother who will not build up the house of his brother, right? So that's why, right, that in terms of the Jewish mission, the mission of the nation, the mission of the community, the mission that's greater than our individual desires, think about it. Like, they're supposed to not be attracted to each other. The widow and the brother aren't getting married because they're attracted to each other. That actually interferes with a valid yibum. They're only doing it, right, to perform an obligation, to perform that mitzvah. If that mitzvah is too great for them, okay, so then they don't perform that mitzvah. And that's why the Torah gives this option. They can perform to marry people. But the brother who died, no, he will not have an heir, and his particular line stops there. He might have another brother who has children, so their father's line continues, but that man will not have an heir, and his name will not be continued. Tom, can a Yevam marry both of the co-wives? No. As we've seen, the yibum can only be performed with one of them. It's either chalitzah or yibum. The other one is released. He does not have that option. And we know that because the mitzvah is to build up the house of your brother, not the houses of your brother. Sharon, were all the men in the general population knowledgeable in this minutiae so as not to screw it up when confronted with these circumstances? Clearly not. And that's why they had to deal with all these circumstances, right? And they tried to basically, through policy, make it that, look, chalitzah, It's always going to be chalitzah. Whenever this situation comes up, chalitzah. And basically, in the Ashkenazic world, it's been chalitzah for centuries, maybe millennia. In the Sephardic world, though, here and there, now and then, there was a yibum, even in the 20th century. And there was, I just was reading about it, that a couple came ready to perform yibum, which would have been allowed in their Sephardic community. I think, I forget in what country, maybe in Syria. But then when they went into Israel, where the rabbinate basically outlawed yibum and said you have to perform chalitzah, they're like, so we can perform yibum in this other country, but not in the Holy Land? And it was, I think, Rabbi Ovadia Yosef who said in that situation, yes, they could perform it. In the Sephardic community, it is technically permissible to perform yibum. Even today, it just never happens. It's totally discouraged. It might happen. In the Ashkenazic community, it's just outlawed. They don't do it. Chalitza, yes, they have to do chalitza, but yibum, no. Sharon, is there a ketubah and those protections to the wife when they are married by bia, right? By intercourse, basically yibum? That's a great question. That's a great question. We haven't come to it yet. I don't know the answer. I think we will come to it probably in this tractate. And we're about, we're on 51. I think there's 115 pages. But we might not get to it until Kesuvos, right? The tractate on Ketubos. So we'll see. And Tom, why didn't they discuss ahead of time who is going to do what with whom? Because they didn't have you as their consigliere. Possibly also because they were, just think about it. Like if one brother was living in another town 50 miles away, or 200 miles away, or 1,000 miles away, in ancient times, that is a formidable distance to achieve communication. And sometimes they didn't even know, and then the brother shows up. They didn't think there was a brother. He died in the war. Then he shows up. I mean, there's a lot of things that can get in the way when there's imperfect communication. But that's why the sages are dealing with all these other possibilities that are not the way the situation ideally would have been dealt with. Okay, my friends, that's what I've got for us today. With God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow for page 52. Have a great night. And please think of the 6 million who perished in the Shoah as we begin Yom HaShoah tonight. I should have just said, I meant to say, I'm certainly thinking it, that we dedicate our learning tonight to the 6 million. Maybe I did say, to the 6 million who perished and all those who survived. We celebrate them and we dedicate our learning tonight to their honor. All the best. I never lit the candle, did I?